everyone. Welcome to a new edition of Human Dialogues. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. I am going to have a very interesting interview, I am sure, because our guest today is an extremely interesting person. I am really happy to be approaching a topic also that I think is important and sometimes undervalued. A lot of people don't or might not be thinking too much about this topic in their day-to-day lives, but I think they should. Today, we're going to be talking about authenticity. And we're going to be discussing this very interesting topic where under our interview entitled Walk the Talk with none other than a dear friend of mine, John Vorhaus, who will be connecting all the way from the United States, California. John Vorhaus is very well known, among other things, because of this book that I'm holding in my hand. Their Comic Toolbox, How to Be Funny Even If You're Not. I know this book very, very well because I happened to translate it into Spanish many years ago. I met John when I was a simultaneous interpreter, and I had to interpret his presentation once in Spain, and then translated his book into Spanish. And we became friends, and we've been keeping in contact, in touch ever since. But John is not just famous because of this comedy writing classic, but also because he's taught and trained writers in over 37 countries around the world and counting, in 5 different continents. He's created TV shows of his own in Nicaragua, Romania, and many other countries. And his writing credits include dozens of teleplays and screenplays, 7 novels, and about 24 works of nonfiction. His latest book is The Little Book of Stand-Up, although I think he's going to be sharing some news on this topic later on with us today. John is a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University and a member of the Writers Guild of America. As I said, he lives in California, and you can contact him. You can check his work on www.johnvorhaus.com. And now, without further ado, let me please welcome John to join us on the virtual screen. Hi, John. Good to see you. Your microphone is muted, John. Please turn it on.
That's a good start. 100%. Perfect performance right from the start. Wait, let me try this again. There we go.
That was
Hi, Jessica.
John. I couldn't have said it better. John, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us on Human Dialogues today. As I said, we're going to be talking about authenticity. And having said everything you do, or many other things you do on your professional life, I think you have a lot to say about this topic. So let me just begin by asking you, what does authenticity mean to you, John?
The first answer I'm going to give, although there are many, one thing authenticity is, it's a strategic advantage. If you have authenticity, you're going to be you'll perform better in a lot of situations than a lot of people who don't have authenticity. I'll give you one example that will get us rolling here. As you know, Jessica, I've been a writer all my life. And when I first came to Hollywood a lifetime ago, an older writer, a mentor of mine, gave me a wonderful piece of advice that it took me a long time to understand. What he said was, keep giving them you until you is what they want. And I can't think of a better way of understanding authenticity in a nutshell than keep giving them you until you is what they want. Because if you don't do this, you set yourself up for a kind of a certain failure, guaranteed failure. You present yourself to somebody and you say, this is not who I really want to present myself to be. Rather, this is who I think you want me to be. And if it turns out that they accept this false version of you, then you end up having to make a commitment, a long-term commitment to doing things or being things or acting in ways that you would rather not, that don't make you happy and don't make you feel comfortable. in my line of work as a writer, I might find myself saying, well, in the name of getting a job, I'm going to try to give the client what the client wants. And there's a certain amount of that makes sense as a writer. But for the health of my career long term, I'm much better off saying to the world, this is how I operate, and this is how I communicate, this is how I think about things and share my thoughts. And if you like that, great, then we can have a long-term dialogue. And if you don't, I'll continue to seek my audience elsewhere. As an also amateur artist, early on, I fell into the trap of trying to create works of art to contest prompts. Like the contest prompt would be celebrate disability or celebrate diversity or celebrate whatever. And I try to come up with a work that I thought fulfilled the terms of the prompt. And inevitably, that did not succeed. But when I looked at my portfolio of works and asked myself, what resonates for me and will also resonate for the contest or according to the parameters of the contest or the call for entries, then I became much more effective, looking for the intersection between what's important to me and what's important to them. So that's my first whack at it.
There we go. So you've not only written, as we already said, several novels and books and screenplays and teleplays, but you've also taught uncountable people how to do that. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing I remember from translating you, among others, was that for characters to ring true, they have to be authentic in every sense of the word. If they have a certain quirk, they have to keep that quirk until they evolve or they change or they progress in a way that makes sense and is true to their nature. And in that way, characters have to walk the talk of their own nature. And I think that many of the problems we sometimes find in reading books or watching movies is that characters don't ring true. They just lack that authenticity. What would you say about that, John?
I'm going to agree with you about 73%. Mm-hmm. And let me start with the 27% where I don't agree with you. There are types of entertainment and communication that we might call genre entertainment. Let's take romantic novels as an example. The consumers of that sort of entertainment have a very clear sense of what they're looking for. They come to the genre for specific story turns, character presentations, even character names, settings, etc. And success in genre fiction comes from understanding what's the audience looking for and then giving them a version of it that they find satisfying. So there are places in the world where the creative solution is more creative problem solving than it is a deep dive into authenticity and consistency. However, when we look at the part of the market or the part of the enterprise that speaks to authentic human expression, really trying to convey something meaningful about the human experience, then the paradigm is more like you create a character with a set of internally consistent qualities, almost like a wind-up toy. Then you wind them up and turn them loose and see how they behave. It's not that you have to impose authenticity on them. It's that if they are authentically constructed from the ground up, then they will behave authentically and consistently just as a natural function of who they are as you understand them in your imagining. I said to my brother once, my brother said to me, he's a very rational guy, he's a scientist. He said to me, when you writers say that the characters speak to you, that's bullshit, right? It's really just you thinking about things and writing them down. And I said, well, it's true up to a point. I create the characters. I impose choices on them. I say this character is going to be tall and clumsy. This character is going to tell lies all the time. This character is going to search for love. And then I put them in motion and they start to behave. They start to take actions and make choices. And the more actions and choices they take, the clearer my picture of them becomes in my mind. At a certain point, they achieve what I like to call critical mass, or let's say I achieve a critical mass of understanding of who the character is. Now I know. And now I can kind of get out of the way and just let the character behave as the character will behave. So if we're talking about authenticity specifically in the area of creating characters, the strategy for achieving authenticity is impose choices on them until such time as you no longer need to impose choices on them, and then just sit back and watch the consequence of those imposed choices.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely what I meant. If they make choices that don't really match all their previous behavior and the way they've always expressed themselves, they're going to sound funny to the viewers or to the readers. And that's what I meant, that you have to find that clear authenticity in the character if you want it to be understood, followed, and supported by readers or watchers, I guess.
There's a great example of what you're talking about, where the viewer is dissatisfied. In certain types of horror movies, where the monster or the killer is inside the house, and the hero or the victim gets out of the house. You made it. You're safe. All you got to do is run down the road. And instead, for reasons that beggar the imagination, the hero turns around and goes back inside the house. Well, we know that the character is going back inside the house because we, as the puppet masters, need a confrontation between the hero and the killer. But the audience says, that character's not doing something that makes sense to me. So they're either inconsistent or foolish or stupid, and whatever they are, now I'm no longer loyal to them. I'm disconnected from them. So again, thinking about authenticity and internal consistency in character development, it's merely a strategic decision. If you make your characters internally consistent and authentic, then the audience will engage with them and stay with them. But if you don't have that internal consistency and authenticity, you run the risk of the audience making a break from the character, saying, you're not behaving according to rules I understand, therefore I don't want to play with you anymore.
Whereas in real life, human beings sometimes don't play by the rules, and we're shocked by people's reactions. So if you find your inspiration when creating characters in real human beings, what would you say is the difference between authenticity in fiction and authenticity in real life?
When I was a bad arithmetic student, I used to get questions that I couldn't answer, so I changed them into questions that I could answer. I'm going to do that a little bit here. Right. I'm going to draw a distinction between people in real life and specific types of characters, that is, comic characters, people who are intended to be funny in stories. The controlling characteristic of comic characters in comic worlds, they do things in service of their self-image. They do things to make themselves feel better. Real people in the real world do things in service of their self-interest. They do things to further their goals. I'll give you a great example, simple example of this. You have a character whose comic filter is, I'm king of the world. Everybody must obey me. And that character comes to a crosswalk at a red light and crosses the street against the light. Why? Because that character will feel better about themselves if the traffic stops and everybody makes way for them. The ego is served. The self-image is served. In the real world, if you do that, then you get killed to death by a car. So it doesn't really serve your self-interest. So in this way, we can see that characters in stories will do things because it serves how they look at themselves and how they feel about themselves. And we in the real world do that too, but we're not monolithic. We have many different ways of of analyzing moments and acting upon them. We might ask ourselves, what's going to feel good? What's going to get me what I want? What's going to get me what other people want? And so on. Sophisticated people with high levels of awareness are aware of all of these different ways of looking at the world at the same time, and get good at kind of watching themselves operate in spaces. And then when they see themselves operate in spaces, they can refine their approaches as they go forward. That requires self-awareness, other awareness, and awareness of awareness, which are things that characters in story don't necessarily need to have in order to take a good ride, and maybe can't have in order to get the story where you want to go. I'll conclude with this thought. You might have a character in a story whose character need is to discover awareness. At the end of the story, they're going to find out who they really are. Well, it's axiomatic. If they're not going to find out who they really are until the end of the story, then they're going to spend 90% of the story never knowing who they are. And we don't expect them to operate effectively or in their own self-interest because their journey's not complete. So the job of the story is to take the character on a journey. But for real people in the real world, the job is much different. The job is to achieve outcomes, attain goals, collaborate, cooperate, lift other people up, lift the self up. It's a good story has a very strong and clear through line from beginning through middle to end. Life does not have that same sense of through line as you and I and everybody listening knows.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned comic characters and gave examples of that, which describes them or defines them. But you're also a novelist. Would you say the same thing applies to other kinds of characters in, let's say, more serious novels? Or is there a different premise there?
Again, we'll draw a distinction between genre fiction, which is essentially an amusement park ride, and modern literary fiction, which is intended to reveal something new and interesting about the human condition, the human circumstance. Or not even modern. Let's take Macbeth as an example. Here's a character who is not operating in his self-interest. He thinks he is, but he's not. He doesn't really achieve transformation. He doesn't get a happy ending, killed to death. A spoiler alert, Macbeth dies. Oh, sorry if you didn't know that. But when I'm writing a novel, my approach is a little bit different. I'm trying to answer a question: what ghost do I need to kill? And mostly what I'm speaking about is, in a lot of my novels, I'm reflecting on an experience that I had at some point in my life. And maybe it's an experience that wasn't completely fulfilling to me. And so when I write a novel, I attempt to bring myself and my characters into a situation where I can explore that kind of moment and get to the fulfillment that I didn't get on the first time around. Of all the novels I've written, my personal favorite is called Lucy in the Sky. It's the story of a 15-year-old boy growing up in the American Midwest in the 1960s. Wants to be a hippie in the worst way. Doesn't know what a hippie is, just knows there are no hippies where he lives at his time. And so he goes on a journey to discover what it means to be a hippie. He discovers it's not about love beats and peace signs, it's about the choices you take, choices you make, and the actions you take. All of this was designed to help me think about what I consider to be the first major tragedy of my life, which is that I was in the right place at the right time to be a serious hippie, but I was just a little too young and I missed the boat. So you can say that for me, the act of writing a novel is the desire to heal an old wound. Other novelists have other desires. Mm-hmm. My assumption is if I create a character and take that character on an emotional journey that I find emotionally fulfilling as the author, because it resonates deep down with what's going on in my heart, in my head. There's a chance it'll translate to other people and they will extract the same values from it. They might not. They might not know the first thing about hippies or care at all about that world. And so that novel's not really going to attract their eye. But I have yet to see a book that everybody loves. So I'm not too worried about that.
But on the other hand, that also somehow reflects the authenticity of your writing, because it's based on your own reflection, on your own analysis, and it is in that sense somehow also authentic, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm going to reach for a metaphor here. Every novel is a Frankenstein novel in the sense that every creator is Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, and every creation is a beast of that creator's creation. No real novel can be authentic, can fail to be authentic on some level, in the sense that it's always going to reflect the writer's experience. And you could even, to take a dumb example, do you remember those books for dummies that were popular 20 or 30 years ago? Accounting for dummies. The writer hired to write that book will surely have been instructed, look, your job is to tell people how to do accounting. That's all you have to do. But that writer is going to bring his or her own sense of humor, perspective, thoughts about what's easy and what's hard. The material will always be inflected by the author's experience. A lot of my writers in television and films say, I can't do this idea because it's an old idea and it's just going to look like something that was done before. It's just another love story. And I always tell them, you never have to worry about that, because by the time you get done filtering it through your own experience, it will be unique to your experience. It won't be like anything else. It can't be like everything else. You can't even do it that way if you try, because your work will be inflected by what you bring to the work. And that's true of every art form you can think of. You can sit down. My grandson, he's 13 years old, and he's such a soulful piano player. He composes songs, melodies that just make you think, this guy's like 40 years old. You can hear the world weariness in the notes. Somebody else might play that exact same piece and you'd get a completely different take on it. The notes are the same. Like, it might sound what's the word I'm looking for? Objectively, it might sound identical note for note, but yet there's nuance in there that will tell you, no, that's Glenn Gould playing the piano. It's not Scott Joplin. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to ask you another question that you inspired me with your last comments. You have taught people all around the world, and you've trained people all around the world, and you've trained them in creating stories, which is something that, as we're seeing in this conversation today, does require a certain level of knowledge of humankind. Would you say that you found differences in the understanding of authenticity from peoples to peoples, from cultures to cultures? Do people view, understand, and transmit or convey authenticity in a different way in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're fish swimming in their own oceans, and they're not really aware of the ocean that they're swimming in. So you'll have people whose, what we think of as their national sense of humor, be very different from one nation to the next based on their cultural experience. I'll give you an example that is recent in my experience, and it starts out as a joke, but it really ends up in an interesting place. The joke is this: many times in my life, I've gone to Germany to teach comedy writing to the Germans. And, people don't think of the Germans as particularly funny people. But I was in Germany teaching comedy writing just in March of this year. And one of my students said the following words: in Germany, we are not encouraged to experience or display I want to make sure I get the phrase right, emotional intensity. In our culture, the idea of emotional intensity is negatively reinforced. And it hit me with the force of revelation. How can anybody be authentically funny, loudly funny, like grandly funny, if they don't have permission to experience emotional intensity? So when we examine the cliche, Germans aren't funny, we peel back a layer and we find out, there might be some truth to that, in the sense that Germans are not, as a class, encouraged to experience this thing called emotional intensity. They might not even realize that that's what's blocking them. I'll give you another example. Everywhere I go in the world, except America, there is this sense that as an individual, I shouldn't try to boast too much or stand too tall or be too proud, or people will come along and knock me down. In Great Britain and other English-speaking countries, this is called the tall poppy syndrome. And the idea is, don't boast or you'll be destroyed. You don't deserve, you're not entitled. And you can see that this attitude will repress ambition. It's a narrative against ambition. Here in America, where we have 250 years of advancing and self-aggrandizing and grabbing and taking and thinking we're better than everybody else, we don't have this cultural norm. The idea that we should be shy about thinking or saying that we're ambitious people, it's baked into our nature. So baked in that we're not even aware of it. And one of the challenges I faced when I started teaching overseas was recognizing that not everybody has the personal interior freedom that I enjoy simply as an accident of my birth and upbringing. And then that taught me, if I'm going to do this job effectively, I need a high degree of other awareness and a high degree of cultural awareness and a high degree of humility, with the understanding that I don't know anything at all about the world. All I can do is get glimpses of it and try to use those glimpses to help other people further down the line. So that's my understanding of that.
Yeah, thank you. That reminds me of an anecdote I usually share when I was living in Russia, which is that, of course, we foreigners in Russia used to group up together and used to go to the same schools and join the same clubs. And I recall several times in which I was maybe traveling by bus, or I was with a group of Latinos in a restaurant and we were laughing out loud, as Latinos tend to do. And people would remind us to be quiet and to not make any noise, because in the Russian culture, that is invading their auditory space, let's say. When you speak too loud or you laugh too loud, you're invading the other person's space. And I would understand them, but I was going to add, I also made friends with Russians, and in the intimacy of their homes, they were loud and they would laugh and scream, and that was okay, but not outdoors or in public. So I suppose that the understanding of what is funny in Russia is totally impacted by that limitation of being noisily funny in public, and which is exactly what you were saying about the Germans. They're not funny, they're just funny their own way, their own unique cultural way. And that's exactly what my question was trying to get to. I think it's important for people to realize that authenticity is different depending on the culture and even depending on the social groups.
I'm going to agree with you about 50-50 on this one. There are different expressions. There are different authentic expressions. Somebody can present themselves to you in a way that is an authentic expression of who they are based on their cultural norms, their background, etc. But the choice to be authentic yet remains to be made. You can have someone who is very much a product of their norms, but not behaving authentically. And somebody else who's very much a product of their norms and behaving authentically without an awareness that they've made the choice, or with an awareness that they've made the choice to be authentic. You've spoken of Russia. As you know, I've spent time in Russia as well. I ran the writing staff of the Russian version of Married with Children. And one of the things that I encountered in working with my Russian writers was this phrase, but it's funny in Russian. They'd pitch me a joke, and I'd say, well, this joke doesn't work. And they'd say, it's funny in Russian. This is my terrible Russian accent. And I realized that when they said that, one of three things was true, and this speaks to authenticity. One possibility is the joke is funny in Russian, and I simply don't have the cultural context to understand the joke. That happens all day, every day. Another possibility is the joke is funny in Russian, but it's lost in translation. The words don't work in another language. Also happens all day, every day. A third possibility is the joke isn't funny in Russian. The writer knows it's not funny in Russian, but is trying to sell it past me on the excuse of it's funny in Russian, you just don't understand, because that particular writer is either too lazy or too scared to go back and do the work. So options A is authentic. Option B is authentic. Option C is very inauthentic. And my job as a creative consultant out there in the world in cultures I don't know is partly to capture culture so that I don't get caught off guard, but it's also partly to explore the inner workings of my peers, to understand what is their level of authenticity, what is their level of honesty, what is their level of self-awareness, and how can I, as their collaborator, help them achieve what they want to achieve based on my understanding or best guess about how they're really operating. In broad strokes, are they lying? Are they telling the truth? If I have an answer to that question that I can trust, then I can operate much more effectively. If I don't know whether they're lying or telling the truth, then it's a much greater challenge for me. And I want to make this clear. I'm not in any sense condemning the Russians or anybody else for lying to a guy like me. If a guy like me came along, first thing I would do is lie to him. But as someone who is always in service of the goal, I want to know what strategies are available to me to reach an outcome that looks like a win for myself, for my counterparts, and for everyone. I describe this goal as wins all around. When I'm in a group situation, trying to achieve a group goal or teaching this strategy, I always say, what you're after is wins all around. You want to look at people around you and understand what do they need in order to feel good? And then what does everybody need in order to feel good? And how can I, as someone who has authenticity and self-awareness, empathy, other awareness, and good intent, how can I serve the individual needs of everybody around me and the group goals that we're all serving? That's my platform for success. I would say full stop is going into situations with hardcore other awareness and militant service to the group's goals. That really is where I find myself excelling. It's when I'm on that track, which is completely different from saying, what I want to go into this situation, what I want out of this situation is for everyone to think how great I am. Because if I try to achieve that goal, if I try to show off or shine, as I put it in my vocabulary, it's never going to work. It's just going to be obvious that I'm trying to shine. I'm trying to show off. I'm trying to gain status. But the minute I say to myself, I'm making a choice. I'm not serving my ego. I'm serving the work. The minute I place myself in service to the work, better outcomes for everybody, including much better outcomes for me. And all of that glory that I want, all of that approval that I want from people around me, the way that I get it is by ignoring it. This is perverse, but it's true. To serve the ego, ignore the ego, that's the path to higher levels of acceptance in everything.
Yeah, because then you're being more authentic. You're being authentic in the sense that you're really serving the work you're supposed to be doing and not yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to know that you play poker, that you published several books on playing poker. So what role does authenticity play in poker?
That's a great question. For context, let me say I've written 10 books on poker. I did all of that work in the first decade of the 21st century when poker was a global, huge phenomenon driven by online poker and televised poker. And as a diligent writer with some interest in poker, boy, did I go to that well. And I went to it again and again and again. And I'm very happy with my body of work. But it is fair to say and authentic to say, as a poker player, I'm a pretty good writer. I'm not a very good poker player. And you might think that that's the sort of thing that a poker player would say, and you're not wrong. But I can list strengths that I don't have. Tolerance for risk, good memory, math skills, that list goes on and on. But here's one thing I do know about, and this speaks to authenticity. Poker players, among other poker players, will present an image. And this is a known word in poker. What is your image? Is your image as an aggressive player? Is your image as a fearful player? Is it a knowledgeable player, an unknowledgeable player? What story are you telling to the other people at the table? My experience has taught me that if you try to adopt an image that is not true to your nature, it won't work. It will appear to other players as what I like to describe a rift in the fabric of space. Mm-hmm. You're telling me one thing, you're being another thing. I'm not buying what you're selling. On the other hand, if you adopt an image that is harmonious with your true nature, that's an image that's easy for you to inhabit and work with and use as a tool. I myself can never sell a scary image at a poker table. You're never going to be afraid of me as a poker player. But I can easily sell a whimsical image. I can get you to underestimate me by the way I present myself using playfulness. No, let me put it a different way. We can say that playfulness is an authentic part of me. Mm-hmm. When I push the playfulness forward and showcase it to the other players at the table, I'm taking a part of me that's authentic and using it as a strategic tool in the situation. It's a more effective tool than taking a part of me that's inauthentic and trying to impose it on myself or impose it on the situation. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the second time I've interpreted authenticity as a strategic practice. And in order to use it that way, it requires that we do two things at once. One is to act as we are acting, and the other is to observe ourselves in action. When I'm writing and writing effectively, I'm not only writing, I'm kind of watching myself writing and asking myself, what are you doing well that's working, and how can you do more of it? I'm studying my own process. Likewise, if I am pushing authenticity forward at a poker table, I'm asking myself, who's buying this? What changes do I need to make? What do I need to make more of? What do I need to make less of? And all of which, this is where I feel like I'm kind of subverting your intent, Jessica, because all of this boils down to how can I act authentically? And if we look at the phrase act authentically, we discover it's kind of an oxymoron. Because acting involves masquerade, but authenticity is the opposite of masquerade. So how can I masquerade in an unmasked way?
If I may be the interviewee right now, I could answer that question from the point of view of humanology. In humanology, we usually explain that all human beings use what we call social masks. And social masks is a well-known concept. But in humanology, we take it a little bit further than most people. We explained that all human beings use social masks. Social masks are made up of all the conventions and norms and rules of a certain group of people or a certain environment. So, for example, if you're going to be talking as a child to an elderly person, you will put on your mask of a child talking to an elderly person, and you will comply with certain rules and certain norms. Okay, so most people learn how to use social masks as they grow up, and they learn to master them in different circumstances, situations, different environments. Whenever you try to enter a group or an environment and you don't really master their social mask, you will look or sound phony, and people will somehow doubt you. And when people are learning how to use those social masks properly, they sometimes learn through trial and error, and they make mistakes, and they correct those masks until they perfect them. But although we're taught how to use social masks, I don't know of anybody who teaches people how to remove them effectively. And that's something we teach in Humanology. How can we remove those social masks? So I would say that social masks are necessary if we want to interact in easy, comfortable, established ways in society. And in that way, you can be perfectly authentic while wearing your social mask and conveying with those norms. So yes, you are acting authentically because you're wearing that social mask. Would that respond to what you just said?
Yeah, it sounds like we're in total agreement. Good for us. As you were speaking, I thought maybe that's how we can think of comic characters in a nutshell. They're wearing the wrong mask.
Yeah.
Whatever would be the right mask for the situation, they don't have it on, and that's why things are going wrong so badly.
Yeah, that's one of the most common situations we find in comedy, I think, when people wear the wrong social masks. We have a comment from, okay, finish up, John, then we have a comment from someone who's watching the interview. Finish up, okay, and I'll ask you the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in human interaction, you kind of implied that there are two possible goals. One goal is a well-lubricated, but not particularly fruitful interaction, normal behavior. People on a bus behaving the way they should behave so that everybody has a good bus ride. But when you start to play for higher stakes, you want love, you want partnership, you want creative collaboration, then you need to be much more militant in taking the dangerous step of taking off the mask, because otherwise you can't get out of the situation what you need to get out of the situation. Years ago, I read a book called The Dance Away Lover. I'm sure it's not even in print anymore, but it made the point that, or maybe it is, I don't know. It was very informative upon me back in my dating days, which is, last century and then some. But the idea was this: if you meet somebody and you're attracted to them, and you give them a fake version of yourself, and they fall in love with that fake version of yourself, at some point in the future, you're going to have to take off that mask and reveal yourself, and it's all going to go to hell.
Yeah.
If you give them your true self from the outset, then they know right away whether who you really are is something that is appealing to who they really are. And you're much more likely, it self-selects. You end up prospecting for a relationship in a place where you can actually get a relationship, because there is a clear mutual understanding of who each other is in that moment. Again, we look at authenticity as a strategy to achieve a benefit. In this case, I might want a long-term love interest. I might want a lifelong relationship with another person. It seems like my best strategy is to fool them into falling in love with me. But experience indicates that that's a flawed strategy, because eventually they're going to find out the truth. And once they find out the truth, then I'm either going to have to hope they fall in love with the authentic version of myself, or go find somebody else. If I lead with authenticity, either I'm not wasting my time where there's no match, or I am investing my time in a place where there's a much greater possibility of a match.
But that, John, requires first knowing whom we are. See, humanology teaches us that I'm very tired of false gurus, people who come to you and tell you, I'm going to tell you what you have to do to be happy or to whatever, I'm so tired of people telling others that. Who on earth are you to know what makes me happy? Who on earth are you to tell me how to live my life? We're all different. And what we usually explain is humanology helps you first get to know and understand who you are so you can then take action. Many people do it the other way around. They say, you have to do this. How do you know that that is what I need to do? And I think that authenticity is also based on that. You can't be authentic unless you know who you are. So you have to do that previous work first.
I'm intrigued by the question, where the hell do you get off telling me what to do? Because every writer faces this question. Everything we write is an instruction to other people. Hey, you should live your life this way. Well, where do you get that power? As a writer, I get that power as a storyteller. It's my job as a storyteller to tell other people what to do. But as a person, as an individual, this question is super alive in my mind right now because I'm finally reaching the point in my life where I'm prepared to take ownership of my ministry. And I'm using that word, I'm using all of those words guardedly because they're all charged words. But I have a mission in life to help other people live their lives more effectively. This is a mission that I have given myself over time or come to understand. But having that mission and acting on that mission are two very different things, because it does take a certain amount of arrogance, although I wouldn't use that word for reasons I can explain, to say to other people, if you follow this path, I think it's going to work out for you. So in my teaching, I never say, you should do it this way. But I often say, if you try it this way, I think you're going to experience this benefit. So give it a try and see if it gets you that benefit. That's where I get off telling other people how to live their lives. Jessica, I am aware that the way I think about things is very unusual. I describe it as a hyper self-obsession. I'm constantly looking at myself and asking myself, why do I think what I think? How do I think what I think? How do I feel? Where are my fears? Where are my hopes? What makes me tick? What makes me the person I am? And I realize that 8 billion other people are not obsessed with themselves the way I'm obsessed with themselves. So why do I have the mission I have? Because I have the quirk that I have. And I can make the most of that quirk by sharing what I discover. Not for the sake of telling you that you should behave this way, but for the sake of telling you, I've made some discoveries because of how I choose to spend my time. And if you adopt or think about those discoveries and use them to self-discover on your own, I think you're going to be better off further on than where you are right now. And insofar as someone will buy a book of mine, they're buying into that prospect. They're saying, John Vorhaus is going to tell me how to do something better. Mm-hmm. And then they'll listen, let's say. But again, if I try to come off as an authority, if I say to them, listen to me because I know better than you, that's when the whole thing breaks down. So I think that's where we have congruence between humanology and what I call the Vorhausian effect.
See, I wrote a little book a few years ago entitled, What Story Do You Tell Yourself? Which is a little bit based on that same concept. And the conclusion is very simple. We each tell ourselves stories. And the story of who we are and how we live our lives, I compare it to screenwriting. And some people live comedies or they live thrillers or they live their lives very, very often mimic the genders. So at the end of the book, what I tell people is that we are each the scriptwriters, directors, and main characters in our own movies, and that we get to choose what story we're going to write and how we're going to live it, and even what characters we're going to have in our own stories. And in that sense, I think you and I really understand each other. Let me go to the comment we have. Somebody wrote,
Yep.
authenticity is one of the primary qualities of a true leader. Aha, we haven't spoken politics yet.
I am not sure I agree with that.
No. What would you say about authenticity and leadership?
There are times when authenticity is a path to leadership, but authenticity is not the only path to leadership. In fact, I think that it's easier to become a leader without self-awareness than with self-awareness. Because if you don't have self-awareness, you also don't have self-doubt. And if you don't have self-doubt, then you can make moves at the expense of other people that those with self-doubt couldn't make. I'll illustrate the point with an example. I worked in Romania in a film studio, in a television production company. The head of the company was a megalomaniac. He was, in my mind, a dangerous person. And the first time I walked into a room with him, I felt myself frightened. I was scared of the person I was with, because I realized this person will stop at nothing and cares nothing about people around him. He's only interested in himself and his goals. And that's why he's very good at achieving them, because he has strength of will and no self-awareness and no other awareness and no consideration or empathy for others. So I think it's quite possible to be a leader without authenticity, because for some people, the controlling idea is must have power. And that controlling idea is so strong that it overwhelms all other considerations. In other words, I might say, I must have power, but I also must be nice to other people. Somebody else comes along and says, I must have power, and I don't care whether I'm nice to other people. If I'm competing against that person's always going to win, because they're not handicapped by considerations of empathy like I'm handicapped by considerations of empathy. They're going to roll right over me. That's one of the reasons that I make careful choices about who I work with. There's an expression in Hollywood. This is going to take a little bit of well, I'll put it to you. You're the translator. How would you translate? How would you interpret or translate the Yiddish word mensch?
I don't really know what it means, so I can't.
Oh, okay. Well, then I get to inform you. Yiddish word mensch. A mensch is a good person. Just basically, it's from the German Mensch, man. But in Yiddish, it has more nuance than that. It means this is someone you can count on. This is someone who's okay. In Hollywood, there's an expression: assholes work with assholes, and mensches work with mensches. And my attitude has always been, life's too short for me to work with assholes. If I encounter the type of people you're describing, who are driven to power, driven to self-aggrandizement, driven by ego, I'm not going to make common cause with them. I don't want to be in a room with them, and I don't want to partner with them. It's going to be a hugely unfulfilling experience for me. If that person is the leader of my country, Donald Trump, then I have a problem.
Yeah, even if they're being authentic, that has nothing to do with not being authentic, because it can be an authentic asshole and still be authentic.
Yes.
John.
So to the comment, I would say I agree with you about 47%.
I enjoyed this conversation, this dialogue very much. I think we could continue talking for hours and hours, especially you and I always got into interesting conversations whenever we had the chance to chat. I know you wanted to show our followers and the viewers your latest birth.
Yes. Oh, may I please? First, let me put it in context. At a certain critical moment in my life, I realized I was two things. I was a writer and a teacher. And I was very afraid of going too far down the teacher road because I had that old expression in my head, those who can't do, teach. I didn't want to be a teacher who was not a writer, and I felt that was a danger. And I had a student say to me once at a pivotal moment, hey, how about those who can do both? And that was just what I needed. And so throughout my adult life, I've really been blessed with a clear understanding that I have two paths, the path of the writer and the path of the teacher. And if I just take care to walk both of those paths by writing books that teach, I'm probably going to be in pretty good shape. So I have two things that I'd like to present here in show and tell. This is, I just received this in a mail yesterday. This is a copy of the Spanish version of my book, The Little Book of Stand-Up. And it's exciting to me to think that people will be learning from me how to do stand-up comedy in a language that I don't even speak. So that's fun. I mentioned earlier that I am coming into acceptance of my mission. I'm trying to own my mission. And with that, I've been working on and will soon release a book called The Book of Practice, How to Do Better What You Want to Do Well. And the ambition of this book is to look at the idea of practice and cast it with the broadest possible definition. Everything from the practice of business or politics to the practice of art or writing, plus science, athletics, interpersonal relationship, craft, anything you can think of, can be viewed through the filter of practice. And the controlling idea of practice, as I understand it, is self-awareness and self-acceptance. If you have self-awareness and self-acceptance, then you can look at the questions, what do I do, and how can I make myself do it better, and make some progress simply by frankly apprehending who you are and what you're about, and then with acceptance, seeking to advance your practice as you see fit. The book is not officially launched, but keep checking back to johnvorhaus.com. It should be out later in the summer, and then it'll be available for you. And Jessica, as you and I have discussed, when it's out, I'm going to come back and I'm going to pimp it hard right here on Humanology, Human Dialogue.
We will for sure invite you over again. Not only that one time, but many others for sure, because as everybody who's been watching this today and will watch it in the reruns too later on, will agree we have a lot to discuss because we both deeply care for human beings, I think. John, as usual, it was a great pleasure chatting with you. I am really, really happy to continue our conversations as time evolves, and I am sure that we will have many coming in the future too. Please take care, continue being the wonderful human being that you are, and I am sure that we will have many more opportunities in the future. And now,
right on.
Yes, and now to all of you who have been watching us and listening to us, let me just remind you that our next Human Dialogues will happen this month on the 31st. We will be discussing the topic, Some Keys to Letting Go, with Coach Marcus Amman, as usual, here on the Institute of Humanology. Thank you, John, again. Thank you, everybody, for watching us. And don't forget to like and share the contents of our interviews. See you very, very soon here at the Institute. Bye.